The silence at Arlington was broken by a ripple in the crowd. 5 masked men pushed forward, their steps heavy with menace. But within 30 seconds, they would be on their knees, trembling before a single soldier who never broke his stance. The air at Arlington National Cemetery was still, almost sacred, the kind of silence that pressed on the heart and demanded respect from everyone who stepped onto those marble pathways. Tourists whispered as they gathered near the tomb of the unknown soldier, cameras dangling at their sides. But their voices were hushed, subdued by the weight of history and sacrifice that lingered in the air. Corporal James Whitaker marched his steady line, rifle balanced against his shoulder. His eyes locked forward with a precision that spoke of years of discipline. His movements were not for show. They were a vow, a ritual, an unbroken chain of honor passed from one guard to the next for generations. Yet among the crowd, 5 figures stood apart, their presence sharp against the reverent quiet. They wore masks, the kind that hid more than faces, they hid intent. Their jackets hung low, their hands shifting beneath the fabric, their eyes flicking not at the monument, but at the soldier who guarded it. Most of the crowd thought nothing of it. After all, it was just another ceremony on another day in Arlington. But one older veteran leaning on a cane felt his chest tighten as he caught their look, that predator's focus that was out of place in a field of the fallen. James had seen such eyes before, half a world away in Afghanistan, where shadows often carried knives and crowds concealed ambushes. Though his face betrayed nothing, his muscles coiled beneath the polished uniform. Every step measured, every breath drawn with purpose. He knew danger when it walked into his world, and danger had just stepped onto sacred ground. The crowd shifted as whispers began, the tension rippling like a hidden current. But the 5 masked men moved with a chilling calm, slipping closer to the rope line, closer to the guard who refused to flinch. They thought him a symbol, a man trapped by ceremony, unable to react. What they didn't know was that James Whitaker had once dragged his dying sergeant through flames with bullets snapping at his heels, had stared down men who would rather die than surrender, and had promised himself that no matter where he stood, he would never back down again. As the men's shadows stretched longer across the white stone, the silence of Arlington grew heavier, as if even the dead were holding their breath. Something was about to happen, something no one expected, and in 30 seconds the world would know that the tomb guard was not just a sentinel of tradition. He was a soldier forged in war, ready to protect this ground with every ounce of his soul. The crowd barely noticed when the first masked man slipped a hand from under his jacket, the glint of steel flashing for only a heartbeat before he angled it low, hidden from most eyes. But James Whitaker saw it. He didn't blink, didn't flinch. His gaze remained locked forward, just as the code demanded. But beneath that stillness, every muscle tightened like a drawn bow. The second man stepped closer, his posture stiff, his head darting left and right as if gauging the timing of the guard's measured steps. The third whispered something sharp, and though James couldn't hear the words, he recognized the tone. Urgency, the language of men about to act. Tourists shuffled nervously, a few parents drawing their children back, sensing something was off, though unable to name it. The air grew heavy, every second stretching longer than it should, until the silence itself felt like a drumbeat pounding in the chest. James shifted his grip on the rifle, subtle, nearly invisible to the untrained eye, but deliberate enough that the veteran with the cane noticed and held his breath. The masked men moved in unison then, like wolves closing on prey. One vaulted the rope line, his shoes striking the marble with a sharp crack, and in that instant the ceremony ended. James turned, a single pivot that was crisp, controlled, and lightning fast, his rifle sweeping from ceremonial posture to defensive weapon in the space of a heartbeat. The first man lunged, but James's movement was faster, the steel bayonet flashing as it locked into place with a sound that cut through the silence like thunder. Gasps rippled through the crowd, tourists pulling back, phones dropping as fear surged through the gathering. Yet James did not raise his voice, did not break his stoic calm. He simply shifted his stance, blocking the attacker's path with a force that radiated something more powerful than aggression. It radiated authority. The masked men hesitated, all but one, who barked an order and charged forward. James sidestepped, his polished shoes barely whispering against the stone, and with one swift motion he drove the intruder back, the rifle's presence unmistakable, commanding. The crowd erupted in chaos, mothers clutching children, veterans standing frozen, torn between disbelief and admiration. But James wasn't thinking of them. He was back in Kandahar, in that night of fire and blood, when hesitation had cost lives. His vow echoed in his mind like a commandment. Protect this ground, no matter the cost. The attackers thought they were closing in. In reality, they were already standing in the eye of a storm, and James Whittaker was about to show them what 30 seconds in his world truly meant. The first impact came like lightning, steel against skin, precision against chaos. James moved with the economy of a man who had drilled every motion 1,000 times. His rifle no longer a symbol of ceremony but a weapon of survival. The masked man who lunged first staggered back as the bayonet met his forearm, not cutting deep but sharp enough to slice through intent. Dropping the blade he carried onto the marble with a ringing clang. The sound froze the air. The second attacker rushed in, faster, angrier, swinging wildly. But James pivoted with perfect control, the rifle but snapping into the man's ribs in a move born of battlefield muscle memory. The attacker gasped, air rushing from his lungs, knees buckling, his fight faltering before it even began. The crowd screamed, some scattering in panic, others rooted in place by the surreal spectacle unfolding before their eyes. The tomb of the unknown soldier had always been a place of reverent silence, but now it was alive with tension, echoing with shouts, gasps, and the sharp cracks of combat against stone. Yet James's face never changed, calm, unreadable, the mask of discipline that hid the fire raging beneath. The third man came low, crouching, hoping to sweep James's legs from under him. But James was faster, driving the bayonet tipped downward with precision, the steel halting the motion and forcing the man to recoil. A fourth leapt forward, this one bolder, fists raised, and for a fleeting second their eyes locked. James saw youth there, reckless determination, maybe even desperation, but none of that mattered. He ducked, turning his body, and used the intruder's momentum against him, sending him sprawling across the polished stone where his mask tore away, exposing fear in a pale, sweating face. The fifth man, the one who seemed to lead, didn't charge. He circled, calculating, watching how the soldier dismantled his crew with measured precision. He sneered, perhaps thinking James was tiring, perhaps believing numbers would soon overwhelm him. But James wasn't fighting for breath or glory. He was fighting for every brother he had buried, for every folded flag he had saluted, for every nameless soldier who lay beneath the white marble behind him. Each motion carried that weight, each strike echoed that vow. By now, the tourists weren't watching a scuffle. They were witnessing a soldier transformed, a guardian unshaken by fear, a storm wrapped in dress blues and white gloves. And as the fifth man finally lunged, reaching beneath his jacket for something hidden, James stepped forward, his rifle snapping to position with a sound that rang like destiny. In that heartbeat, everyone watching knew. The next 30 seconds would decide everything. The leader's hand slipped under his jacket, and the metallic glint of a pistol caught the light, freezing the world in one terrifying instant. Gasps tore through the crowd, children cried out, and parents pulled them close, but James didn't flinch. His training took over, instincts honed in Afghanistan where life and death lived in the space of a breath. He lunged forward, knocking the man's wrist upward with the bayonet's steel tip, the shot cracking harmlessly into the sky, echoing through Arlington like thunder. Panic rippled outward, tourists scrambling, but James stayed rooted, immovable, unshaken. The pistol clattered across the marble, skidding toward the line of tombstones, but the fight wasn't over. The leader snarled, fists flying, throwing everything into his desperate strikes. James absorbed the blows with the stoicism of a soldier who had endured worse in the burning sands of Kandahar, then countered with swift, precise movements, rifle butt to the jaw, elbow to the chest, boot driving the man back step by step. One of the earlier attackers stumbled up from the ground, clutching his side, but James pivoted, his rifle snapping in a controlled arc, knocking him back down with mechanical efficiency. The discipline of the guard was more than drill. It was control, patience, and timing, and James embodied it with every movement. The crowd, once terrified, now stood in stunned silence, watching a single soldier hold the line against 5 men who had thought they could break sacred ground. Blood dripped from a split lip, sweat shone on his brow, but his eyes never wavered, fixed like stone on the threat before him. The leader tried once more, charging, teeth bared in frustration, but James met him head-on, rifle raised not as a relic of ceremony but as a weapon of justice. With one crushing strike, the man hit the marble floor, gasping, his mask ripped away, revealing not strength but fear. The fight drained from him, replaced by disbelief at the soldier's unshakable will. The others, beaten and broken, dared not rise again. Sirens wailed in the distance now, Real security racing to the scene, but they would arrive only to find the battle already decided. James stood tall, rifle in hand, unbending, framed against the eternal flame and the rows of silent white headstones. The tomb remained untouched, the unknowns undisturbed, because their guard had held. He wasn't just a soldier in dress blues. He was the wall that would not break, the vow made flesh. And in those moments, as the men surrendered under his shadow, Arlington itself seemed to breathe in relief. The world around Arlington seemed to move in slow motion as the last of the masked men hit the ground, disarmed and gasping for breath. James stood over them, chest heaving, his polished shoes scuffed, his once immaculate uniform streaked with dirt and sweat. Yet his posture remained unbroken. Rifle upright, shoulders squared, eyes steady. He could hear the sirens now, echoing off the marble walls, growing louder as security forces closed in. But the crowd had already begun to understand what they had witnessed. Silence spread across the plaza, heavy and reverent, until even the wind seemed to pause. Mothers held their children tighter, veterans in the crowd straightened with pride, and tourists who moments ago had panicked now stared with awe at the lone figure who stood between chaos and sacred ground. A boy whispered to his father, "Dad." He didn't even flinch. The words carried, soft but powerful, as though they had been spoken for everyone present. Officers rushed in, weapons raised, but their movements slowed when they saw the scene. 5 defeated men at the feet of a single guard, and that guard standing as though he were carved from stone. James did not look at them, nor at the crowd, nor at the attackers being dragged away in handcuffs. His eyes never left the horizon. His stance never wavered. For him, this was not about victory. It was about duty, about a promise whispered long ago over the body of a dying friend in the dust of Afghanistan. He had vowed to carry the weight of sacrifice, to honor those who could no longer stand, and to protect the sanctity of this ground with his life if necessary. The world could applaud, the cameras could capture, the officials could commend, but James needed none of it. The only tribute he sought was silence, the same silence that wrapped itself around the tomb of the unknown soldier. As the sun broke through the clouds, a shaft of light cut across the marble, bathing him in gold. And there he remained, motionless, unflinching, a living symbol of courage carved against the backdrop of eternity. Arlington would not remember the men who tried to desecrate it. It would remember the soldier who refused to fall. If this story moved you, show your support by liking, commenting, and sharing it with others. Subscribe to Unheard Heroes for more powerful stories that honor courage and truth.